Hello, this is John. I'm a PhD student at UT San Antonio. And on this slide you have my Twitter handle, which could be useful if you want to download materials for this presentation. A couple of comments on the title of the presentation. The title uses the word discussion. So where did this discussion occur? The discussion occurred in a virtual exchange in the fall of 2017 among groups of teacher candidates from the United States, France, and Turkey. The title also mentions ideological tensions. What are these tensions? In our paper, in this research, we argue that these tensions occur in metaphor as the Turkish participants discuss the presence of Syrian refugees in their country. You can download this presentation, which has some links and other resources, by using the QR codes, or again, you could go to my Twitter page. I want to recognize the research team that worked on this data and on setting up the original exchange in 2017 and 18. It's an international team from France, the United States, and Turkey. I'm going to give very brief introduction about the Syria-Turkey situation, and I apologize for how basic it is, but it is this way in interest of time. This map is from the United Nations. It reflects data that are 1 year old. The darker colors on the map indicate a higher concentration of Syrian refugees. In the dark red areas around Istanbul and around the border with Syria, we see concentrations in each province of more than 300,000 registered refugees from Turkey. The border itself is 911 kilometers. The estimated number of Syrian refugees in Turkey, 3.6 million as of last year. Extremely huge and indigestible number. If we want to correlate it to the populations of other countries, 3.6 million is a little bit more than the population of Uruguay. In reading some of the literature about the social pressures that the presence of refugees has put on Turkey, and Turkey has the largest number of refugees in the world, I came across the phrase social shock from an academic report on the refugee situation, and it reflects that the presence of refugees in Turkey amounted, as of 2019, to 5% of the population, putting immense pressure on the systems of government, including education. And we should be conscious of the fact that the Turkish participants in this telecollaboration are living all of these experiences. They are seeing this presence of Syrians where they live. There's some likelihood that they will be working with Syrian refugees in the future. And this led us to the research question for this research, which is, how do Turkish teacher candidates represent Syrian migrants in telecollaboration? I'm going to spend a couple minutes reviewing cognitive metaphor theory, which was the theoretical framework for this research, a bit about the history of immigrants and metaphor, and some comments on the methodology of critical discourse analysis. I think there are three propositions that we make in doing this research. And the first is in identifying metaphors as the principal unit of analysis is that metaphors help us see things. Metaphors, according to the work of Lakoff and Johnson, are constructed according to source and target domains. We try to explain things by referring to a domain that is more familiar to us, and I'll say more about this later. Second, metaphors covertly express ideologies. They can promote the objectification and marginalizing of outsiders, in the case of migration. And third, critical discourse analysis itself and its methodology pays explicit attention to metaphor. Critical discourse analysis has power, injustice, political, social change as its focus, and the metaphors that we analyzed in this research certainly do pay attention to issues of power and justice. Other metaphoric studies related to migrants have related, and this is all over the world, have related migrants to disease, to disorder, speaking of the flow of Central Americans across the border between the United States and Mexico. They are often related to water, to flowing water. Migrants are characterized as criminals, as animals, as a burden on society. So we are using these metaphors in a very powerful way to see migrants as criminals, as animals, etc. One of the works that was very important for the research was the work that Santa Anna did 20 years ago in his book Brown Tide Rising. He compiles a corpus of Los Angeles Times articles that make these references to and build this metaphoric language or structure about migrants as animals, as criminals. And he uses the phrase everyday metaphor. In our research, we use covert metaphor, but there are other terms, conventional metaphor, and the meaning of these phrases, I think, is we're not saying explicitly migrants are animals, but we're describing them, our language about them is constructed in such a way that these metaphors become apparent in critical discourse analysis, that is, in very focused study. So a bit about our data and analysis. I'll talk about the nature of the telecollaboration itself and the metaphoric tensions that we identified in the data. First, if you want to download a sample of the data that we used, you can use this QR code, or again, use the link on my Twitter page. Again, the telecollaboration occurred in the fall of 2017. There were 112 participants, including 34 from Turkey. And it was a 6-week interaction, and because everybody participating was a teacher candidate in Turkey, these are people who are going to become English teachers in Turkey. The collaboration focused on topics of migration, gender, religion, ethnicity, as they relate to education. These are the 3 metaphoric tensions that we identified in the paper that resulted from our research. And similarity and difference refers to the similarities and differences that the Turkish participants saw between themselves and Syrian refugees. The third tension relates to the nation of Turkey itself, Turkey serving as a bridge or connector between different cultures, and in this case, between nations. and the spreading referring to the spread of refugees within Turkey itself. I'm going to focus in this presentation on the tension number 2, which is that between gift and scarcity. As an example, one of the Turkish participants wrote, "We share our country with them because they need it." And this, in our analysis, became grouped under the heading of the gift metaphor. The scarcity metaphor, one example from a Turkish participant who wrote, "Government established refugee camps for them, but the population of them are so much that the camps are not enough, and refugees move to other cities in the country." So the suggestion is that Turkey is a container of a kind, has a fixed amount of resources, and refugees might be placing a burden on these resources. This was not a quantitative study, but I wanted to give you an idea of how frequently these different metaphors occurred in the data. The main conclusion to draw from these numbers, I think, is that the metaphors were fairly widespread among the 34 participants. We're not just talking about one or two instances, but they did occur with some frequency and were identified through open and focused coding, and then placed into these pairs representing tensions. To focus on the metaphor of gift and scarcity, and again, if you downloaded the data, you can have a look at exactly what I'm talking about. I mentioned this idea of Turkey as a container. For these Turkish participants who are university students who are being trained to be English teachers in Turkey, they see this Syrian refugee situation as kind of a dialogue between gift and scarcity, in that the country, Turkey, is giving educational opportunities to Syrian refugees, and the scarcity comes in when Turkish students feel that perhaps these Syrians are taking away opportunities that might otherwise have gone to Turkish students. And we see this tension expressed in the excerpts on this slide and on a second slide, where one of the Turkish participants writes, "I just can't stand that somebody have the same opportunities as we have without struggling." Again, this goes to this idea that there is a limit to the opportunities that are available, and a fear that Syrians might be taking these opportunities away. By way of discussion and conclusion, I'll talk a bit more about covert metaphors, the metaphor of gift, and some implications of this research. Covertness means that we do not say explicitly that refugees are guests in our country. These participants did not say that. They were much more subtle in their use of language, and being covert means that they are not always certain about how to regard the situation. There are instances of showing great empathy toward Syrian refugees, toward expressing a common humanity. But there are also, almost in the same breath, expressions of distancing, of referring to Syrian migrants as us, or as them, and the Turks are us. A bit of pronomial separation occurring. So empathy can occur at the same time as dangers are recognized. Turkey as a container, what fills it adds pressure to it and creates risk. To look at just at the gift metaphor, just with a little bit of thought, we can see some things that are hidden inside of that metaphor that might be being expressed without being talked about explicitly. And the first idea is that those receiving a gift, in the way that we understand gift in a large part of the world, is that we expect something in return. What are these refugees from Syria going to give to Turkish society? And something that I've already referred to is this fear implicit in the giving of a gift is, are we giving away too much of our resources? These are all ideologies, and they are ideologies covertly expressed through metaphor in our argument. The implications for teacher education are that, first, that ideological tensions are important to teacher identity. The personal, professional, and the political all go into forming what a teacher believes and what they do in the classroom. The second implication is the importance of context, the impact of social and political developments on how a teacher practices their art, their craft. And third, the point I've been trying to make is that we might consider how our metaphors operate to conceal ideologies that we have within discourse. And this can be done explicitly in a multicultural education classroom, for example, in which we're working with future teacher educators, to use some of this data perhaps to show the metaphors that are not always fully expressed, but that are implicit and somewhat hidden, and reflect the ways that people think and behave. These are my references, and again, this is the link to download the presentation from today, and thank you very much for your attention.